really are. I'm 36, I'm not that young. I'm not that old too, right? How did I convince her? I just told her what I thought, what I felt about the book and what I felt about this story.
Maybe you grew beard.
Sorry?
You grew beard, you convinced her.
Exactly. I grew my beard and all of a sudden I looked older. You're totally right. And no, I really explained to her what were my motives and why I was so interested in it. And also, I read the book before it became so successful. So I guess I was the first one too to ask her.
I think the book sold something like 5 million copies in 38 countries.
Yeah, something like that.
So while we're on the subject of the book, I want to read one thing. The first is that this film has been praised high and low. The reviews are coming out really well, and I read, actually the Hollywood Reporter said something about it's so rare that a film actually lives up to the power of a novel, and that this film does that. And Tatiana, the author, said, and I quote, she said, "The book and the movie have the same DNA. It's his movie, and it's my book. It's got his personal touch in there." So I wanted to ask you what you thought she meant and how you sort of imprinted yourself onto someone else's story.
Well, I think she meant we sort of have a child together. DNA. No, it's true that when you adapt a book, there is something coming from the author, something coming from you. I mean, you have words, and then you're gonna design images. It's not the same, you know. It's not the same material, and it's not the same length. But with that book, I stayed actually quite faithful to the book because it was well plotted with solid characters. The structure was solid too. So I mean, 80% of the job was done. The real challenge though was to deal with these two periods of time that intercut, and to keep, you know, the story fluid. And that's something we worked very hard on writing the screenplay. But I'm sure like pretty much everybody read the book. Not everybody. And I'm sure now you're going to read it.
Just by a show of hands, how many people have read it? Is there a good amount? I also know that...
And have you been disappointed?
No. Thumbs up.
Because, you know, a book fan can be really brutal sometimes.
I also read that you discovered, or this was you have a lot of personal connection to this story. You have a grandfather who perished at Maginec, and also I know your mother had an experience in a Holocaust museum. So I was wondering, and you also, I read that maybe you discovered you had relatives in Israel during the filming. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what came out for you personally in the making of this film.
Yeah, this is true. I'm from Jewish background, and I lost part of my family during Holocaust. You mentioned my grandfather, my mother's father, obviously. And yeah, so I always thought I would do a movie about Holocaust someday. I never thought I would have done that so young. But it's really the book that made me feel, okay, this is it. And it's not so much that I feel I have a personal connection to it, because I'm sure that millions of people around the world who doesn't have a personal connection still feel connected to that story. It's more than, I was very interested in the contemporary point of view on history. Because I think sometimes when you learn history in the history books or in documentaries, there's something a bit abstract, and it's only the facts, and you need that. But what I liked here is that history feels closer, because you understand how history can have a resonance in our everyday life. And I thought the book had a very, very universal message.
And I understand one of the things that propelled Tatiana to write this story was the fact that this history was not taught in French schools for many, many years, and that's a recent phenomenon, that the Roundup at the Velodrome was under the radar. So I also wanted to ask you, as someone who's French, what does it mean for the French to sort of, you know, open the closet and unleash some of these literally, I think, in the film, but to unleash some of these demons. The French are a very proud people, and what is it to confront this history, and also how has the film been received in France, or how do you anticipate it will be received if it has not yet come out there?
No, it was already released in France, and it was a great success, both by the press and the audience. There was no controversy, honestly, because I think we now have enough distance and perspective to deal with that as a mature country, a mature society. And also, I think the people who could have felt guilty, most of them are not there anymore. So, I mean, 95% of the people who saw the movie were not even born when it happened. So, it's their story, but it's not. It's their DNA. Let's go back to DNA, but it's not their story. So they were interested. The ones who were shocked, though, were the young ones, because, like, imagine the teenagers. Like, they go with their school, they go to see the movie, and they're like, "What? The French police did arrest these people?" Because, of course, that's not something that it's always about the Nazis most of the time, for a reason, of course. But I mean, the Nazis did not invent anti-Semitism. Across Europe in the 30s, the anti-Semitism rose everywhere, and there were a lot of governments in the occupied country that would collaborate with them. And so I think it's time now to face that for a lot of countries in Europe. Not every country did so for now. In France, I think we made a good step, I would say.
You know, it's interesting because one of the themes, and I don't really have a question about this, more of a comment, maybe you want to add to it, but this idea that there's a parallel between Sarah's guilt for having failed at saving her brother, and the guilt of the collective sort of guilt of the French people that's sort of embodied in the character of Julia as she studies this and she's in the pursuit of this truth. And you know, it seems that Julia, in a sense, is able to reconcile and transcend that guilt, and for Sarah, it's crippling and ultimately fatal.
I don't think Julia experienced guilt. I think she experiences compassion, and she's shocked to learn about all this. And Sarah, yes, she feels guilty, and I'm sure a lot of you here know that, but there were two ways to survive Holocaust. Or you were full of joy in life and you wanted to enjoy every second of it, or you just couldn't accept the fact that why did I survive and not my brother or my mother, etc. That's what some people call Holocaust or survivor's guilt. And I think that was very interesting, and it's not interesting, and that's not something that's addressed a lot in movies. And I was interested in that. But regarding Julia, it's more compassion. I mean, the other one where we can find guilt would be Edouard Thézac. He would experience guilt, and he was not a bad person. The story haunted him and haunted probably everybody that saw what was in that closet anyway.
So the last thing I want to ask you before we open it up for some audience questions, and this is in reference to something Rabbi Heyer said when he introduced the film, which is there's this concept of Holocaust fatigue, which is the idea that the genre is so overworked and overdone and overwhelming. There's an incredible amount of material on the Holocaust, and Rabbi Heyer says it never goes out.
I'll be honest with you, I'm so tired of to answer that question. I mean, someone who makes a superhero movie has to answer to every journalist about superhero movies. There were like 4 of them this summer.
Well, let me ask you.
What I think, though, is that a bad Holocaust movie is something that's terrible because it's very counterproductive. So, as an artist, you better have something to say if you want to address that subject, and that I agree with. But I mean, most of the journalists who talk about that, it's because they like the movie and they want to try to say to their readers that no, it's not the one you saw before. And also, you have to understand that in a French perspective. That's true that in the US, you had a lot of movies, but in France we did that, and especially not on the Veldiv. And first, I made a French movie, so now it travels a lot and it's successful all around the world. But it was a French movie in the beginning, and the French needed that movie.
It's interesting. I think you bring up a very good point, and I agree with you. And so I think the question then is, how do you bring ingenuity and freshness and power